Have you heard of, seen, or worked on a production of Thornton Wilder's American masterpiece of the theater, Our Town? In the play, the character of a stage manager sets the scene directly for the audience, placing us in a particular town in New England. The play is a snapshot of a time and place, but it unfolds as a discovery and tender celebration of cycles of life and the gift of life itself. With primary trust, Eboni Booth offers us both a 21st century answer to the play as she captures the essence of a small town and its citizens, and she does homage to that stage manager through the play's opening with the central character. This is no Our Town simply reprised, however. The play is all its own, as its questions revolve not just around how much we pay attention to the beauty of small things, but how we may build a life through incremental change. Welcome to Forward Theater. I'm Marcella Kearns, Artistic Associate here, and I will be your host and guide through this pre-performance introduction to Primary Trust, our 2025-2026 season opener. The story you'll experience today won the Pulitzer Prize for Drama in 2024. Now, what I'd like to do this season is every once in a while, I'd like to give you a little bit more information about these awards that we'd like to list, just in case you're not as familiar with them. I know we've all heard about the Pulitzer, but what does it actually do? This particular award distinguishes playwrights. The Pulitzer for Drama distinguishes playwrights by giving them $15,000. The award is for an American author, and it's preferably original in its source, and it's dealing with American life. In their decision to bestow the honor upon this particular work, the Pulitzer jury described Primary Trust as a simple and elegantly crafted story of an emotionally damaged man who finds a new job, new friends, and a new sense of worth, illustrating how small acts of kindness can change a person's life and enrich an entire community. William Jackson Harper, whom you may know as one of the lead actors in the TV comedy The Good Place, originated the role of Kenneth, the play's central character, in the world premiere off-Broadway at the Laura Pels Theater in May 2023. Originally produced by the Roundabout Theater Company, Primary Trust has since its premiere made the rounds in the United States. With 13 productions, it was the fourth top produced play in the 2024-2025 professional season. The La Jolla Playhouse hosted its West Coast premiere in September 2024. And this season, the trend continues. Ford's production marks its Wisconsin premiere. One quick side note, if you happen to see a picture of the original cast, you may wonder why you see 5 humans instead of the 4 you may see on our posters. The world premiere cast included a musician. In interviews from Roundabout's Upstage Guide and V Magazine, Booth discusses several sources of inspiration for the play. She pinpoints a time of aloneness and isolation, a time of doubt in her future. In addition, though the play itself doesn't really center around trouble with alcohol or alcoholism, she connects a history as a bartender, a witness to regulars, and as a bar consumer with curiosity about the vulnerabilities that time and space and that influence can really conjure. She says, I was definitely flooded by my past and my fears for the future in a way that frightened me when she was having a drink or 3. She said, I also saw a lot of regulars as a bartender. I worked at places where we had some people who came in every night of the week, every day of the year. I had a curiosity about their lives. I think I'm drawn to stories of loneliness and people who are trying to do battle, however quietly, with a feeling of being isolated. So it wasn't conscious, but I think writing Primary Trust was my way to better understand moments in my life where I felt very alone, very sad, when I wanted to connect with people but wasn't completely sure how to go about it. What do I want people to take away? She was asked. I found that I go to art, she said, for a feeling of community and recognition. Like, wow, I'm not the only person who thinks that. I'm not the only person who does that. I belong to a bigger world. And there's something in that connection that makes me feel, however temporarily, like, oh, maybe I'll be okay. Eboni Booth is a resident playwright at New Dramatists. Her tenure began in 2021 and will last through 2029. Originally from the Bronx, or New York City, she was first exposed to theater when a local college needed child actors for a production of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. She was lit up, in her words, by the collaboration and the sense of community of a group of people making something that wasn't there before. And she says that stuck with her as she gravitated towards the industry eventually. She graduated from the University of Vermont, and she almost took a job offered as a journalist in Burlington. Briefly during college, she had decided she didn't want to be an actress anymore. But in making a choice, she said she knew she'd be haunted if she didn't try. So she didn't take that job. She headed back to New York City, and she did work for an extended period as an actress, appearing in productions at Playwrights Horizons, Manhattan Theater Club, Ars Nova, Soho Rep, and more. By the time that she reached her mid-30s, she was working regularly and off Broadway, but she found that she wanted and needed to find additional means to support herself. I know that may actually be quite relatable to many of us. So she came to playwriting a little later in her life. A friend and colleague of hers, Boo Killebrew of Collaboration Town, took her out for drinks and suggested writing. In Booth's words, Killebrew said they were adults and they needed health care. She figured she knew a little something about dramatic structure from her training as an actor, so she started writing bad plays at first. Of course, she'd confess, but then really bit by bit improving with each one, finding her voice. In an interview with Roundabout, she actually gives some advice to young playwrights and shares that she found her voice in part. This really struck me when she moved away from imitating others. Now, when a painter is learning to paint, very often it's an exercise to copy a famous painting, to really dissect, look at how that painting came together. Very often, as writers write, they might either consciously or unconsciously adopt the style of someone that they think is really good, or someone that they really think or that is really successful. And so this is something that she relates. She was experiencing and kept working to find actually the way that it was right for her to tell a story. Eventually, then, she found her way to Juilliard's playwriting program. Her work has garnered critical acclaim alongside awards, including the John Gassner Award and the Helen Merrill Award for Playwriting. Here's another one. The Merrill Award, Helen Merrill was an agent, and this award supports emerging and established playwrights with a really substantial sum. I believe it's $30,000 to allow them to be able to work for a time without the concern of financial burden. Her work has been developed with Cape Cod Theater Project, Ohio Playwrights Conference, WP Theater, Two River Theater, Clubbed Thumb, and Northern Stage. Beyond Primary Trust, her most well-known work is Paris, which premiered in January 2020 at the Atlantic. Paris is not about Paris, France, as you might think. It is about a young Black woman living in a primarily white town in Vermont. Primary Trust is about a 30-something Black man living in a primarily white town outside Rochester, New York. That's out in Western New York. So this is really interesting, these parallels. Examining living in a certain kind of isolation, whether it's due to race, class, or geography, and the Venn diagram of all three is conceptual work to which Booth is really frequently drawn. In American theater, this year's Pulitzer winner, actually, playwright Brandon Jacobs Jenkins interviewed Booth about this inspiration, what she chooses to tackle in her work. I'd like to share a little bit of that interview now because it is so deliciously specific. From work of yours, I know, he says, you seem to be interested in a certain form of Black life that quietly survives or thrives inside of a predominant white social context, in which being the quote, lonely only, end quote, in any given location is frequently a given. I'm struck by the fact that the New England Town and Primary Trust can be as small as it is, and yet it feels like everyone's still a stranger to Kenneth, and he's a stranger to them. He sort of lives in the corner of Wally's, drinking his Mai Tais and living pretty comfortably with his invisibility. I don't know if that's intentional. So, from this thought, Booth relates that a feeling of alienation is something she's always probably going to write about. She says, I rendered it literally in my earlier play, Paris, and in Primary Trust racially, because in those environments, I do feel a certain kind of isolation. Yet there's a lot of ambivalence because I did spend a lot of time in all white environments growing up and in school. So there's the tug. There's both the familiar and the strange. And that sort of liminal space has also mirrored a lot of my experiences emotionally. This is where her sense of nuance is really, really beautiful. I often feel, she says, like I'm sort of on the margins. So I do find myself gravitating toward people and things that can preserve that alienation. It sounds pejorative, but it's not. This sort of uneasiness about what home is something that's interesting to me, she says. And she continues, so many people don't think Black people are where they are. You know, they hear small town and automatically think white. Those assumptions interest me. I'd also like to bring up briefly an experience. I got to see a play called Flyin' West out in Colorado this summer about though it's fictionalized, it is based on and about a primarily Black town in Kansas. And now this is exactly the kind of setting, exactly the kind of invisible history and also invisible population, so to speak, that she's talking about. We make an assumption. How would we think that this town could be predominantly Black? While she's talking about a predominantly white town and the sense of being that lonely only, the assumptions that an audience might have is something that she's really questioning and asking us to explore ourselves too. I'd like to return for a moment too to Booth's advice to emerging playwrights, because it's clear now that her own spirit really reads from her answer, and how much this spirit is echoed in the simple kindnesses of characters in Primary Trust. She says, something else that's helped me as I was starting to write was keeping my envy and self-hatred in check and really trying to be a supportive community member. It's hard, and it's gotten even worse after the pandemic. Resources are so limited, and we're all vying for the same few spots. But I think that to be generous with other people and to find a way to be generous and patient with yourself as you navigate this complicated industry is a good skill to have. This kind of expansive spirit also makes me think, if there are any Ted Lasso fans out there, that you might feel a sense of tone that is very similar. There has been an arc, there was a trend a couple of years back of kind comedy, things like Schitt's Creek, things like Ted Lasso, in which characters would make a choice, and in response to that, um, our assumption as audience members, again, playing into assumption, not necessarily about race this time, sometimes correct, but maybe about how we think someone is going to react, what we think someone's behavior is going to be, was really upended. Audience assumptions about how a character would behave were continually challenged. Our expectations were that the reaction would be something that would be negative, that might actually be diminishing in some way. And at more turns than not, a character would make a choice that was healthier, that was better, that was kinder. The very fact that as audiences we were surprised by this um, is, yes, a little bit sad, but the fact that people could keep evolving and keep making choices that were kinder, kinder and more welcoming um, was, I think, one of the major reasons why these comedies are popular. To bring that back to Eboni Booth, um, I think you might witness something similar occurring in Primary Trust. And it's very clear from her statement about her own work um, that this is a playwright with a truly expansive spirit. So, to move forward and share with you why bring this play to forward, uh, I think that's one very obvious answer. But I'd also like to say that artistic director Jen Uphoff Gray is really effusive about the piece. And so were all of us who read it. We knew, she said, from the moment that we read this play that we would desperately want to produce it. Now, Forward's literary committee, the Vanguard unit, which reads and assesses potential plays for upcoming seasons, had read Paris and appreciated Booth's voice, but that play itself wasn't the right fit. Trust is. It's, says Jen, that beautiful combination of hilarious, heartwarming, profound, and teaching you something without ever feeling like you're taught. These characters are so relatable, and the piece is theatrical without being showy. How it's structured, she continues, means that it's inherently for the theater. It can't be a movie. It's made to be a play. In fact, Heidi Schreck, another actress playwright whose work at Forward was featured in a recent season, that's What the Constitution Means to Me, in case you got to see it, speculated in a conversation with Booth that the unique structure of the play might have been one of the reasons that it caught the Pulitzer jury's eye. Uh, you'll hear that sometimes Booth tends to write in a voice that could be theater, could be prose. So we'll let you experience what that means at the performance. Director Mikael Burke, whose work you may have last seen at Forward with last season's opener, King James, returns to tackle Primary Trust. I'd like to share with you how he sees this story and what he chose to explore. At first rehearsal, he discussed what he most appreciates about the play is that he sees it as a journey of self-actualization. This story, he said, and this takes me back to the Ted Lasso Schitt's Creek comment, subverts our grown-up, jaded expectations. Every time we think the shoe is going to drop, other humans step forward in this play to embrace and uplift. It's a great reminder of what's possible when we remember we're all in this together. We're never actually alone, even when we think we are. Burke finds that the play is one of his favorite examples recently of what's possible in the theater, not simply because of the structure or the potential for theater magic itself, but in the way it inspires the audience to play along. Under his direction, his hope is that you'll experience the essence of a particular, yes, small town American suburb, a mid-sized city, but design-wise, a world that feels a bit timeless. In his words, it could have walked out of a Sears catalog 50 to 60 years ago, and it's a world that could be last week. It could be tomorrow, but something that speaks to all of us in this American experience of finding our way through and forging a path even when we don't know where that path is headed. All of our designers have worked with Forward on multiple productions, apart from lighting designer Maz Ahmed, who is making their debut here with us. Welcome, Maz. So, how did our design team try to capture that sense of timelessness and heart that Michael was describing? Our scenic designer, Chris Dunham's take. This is a beautifully small play. So, one of our key ideas is not to crush it. It would be easy to overwhelm this if you got too into it. So, part of serving that was to move the visual of this play all the way down into the audience. Very simple set pieces that come in and out. In other words, scenically and in collaboration with Jolie Sarajian, our props designer, the production is trying to employ a spare sketch of what the actors need to do their work. Minimal props, enough to make clear the action involved will appear, but there won't be a massive amount of dressing. One particular element I don't want to give away, you'll see when you enter the space, has a position designed to give the audience both a sense of being a part of and apart from this small town. There's a hope both to conjure a sense of intimacy and community, but also distance, the kind of alienation and isolation that Kenneth experiences. Dunham's intent was to plant this particular element in such a way that Kenneth can see it, almost like stargazing, fascinating, but beyond where he is. Maz notes in discussing how lighting will come into play that the play really walks an interesting line between realism and presentationalism. There's a lot of direct address and a lot of moments wherein we're in the world of the play. So what I'm trying to do is create an atmosphere where we can be very tight on a person and still have it feel like it's part of the real world, not taking us out of the world itself. Maz's work, incidentally, took them to Spotlight Construction, where our set was being constructed, to build out some very particular lighting elements operating in conjunction with scenic pieces. Again, you'll see what I mean. Though this story wants to straddle a sense of timelessness and now, or recently, or tomorrow, costume designer Karen Brown Larimore notes that the show is pre-cell phone. How did she manifest a cohesive look for costumes? What Michael's looking for is mid-century, she says. So that's where I went, to mid-century Hawaii and that sort of classic look. Her work needs to account for one actor who never leaves the stage, who has to evolve without a full costume change. You might be able to guess which character that is. Another character plays multiple characters without leaving the stage much, so they need one base look as well. Two of them actually do this. Karen solved this problem by using multiple pieces and accessories along with a base look, but all of those lines will have a mid-century feel. I encourage you to take note of the color palette that she chose for this arc. What's bright, what's dull, what changes, what stands out, and what does that mean to you? Last but not least, Forward's resident sound designer and composer Joe Cirqua is on this season opener. At first rehearsal, he shared that his initial ideas had taken a turn based on the inspiration of a fellow team member. One of the characters, whom we never see, he said, is this keyboard player at Wally's Tiki Bar, this major location in the play, who's always playing a Casio. That was the original electric keyboard. I had one. It sounded awful. He didn't say that word. But we could all afford them. At first, he was thinking that was the sound of Kenneth's world. Then, when Chris introduced the idea of multiple set pieces shifting to reflect locations, he said it really altered what he had thought about doing. The Casio was still a really important part of it, he says, but I had to expand the sound of the scene changes. So what you're going to hear is a shift that blends transition to within the scene. Within the text of the play, a reader learns what the musician at Wally's is playing. Joe took the chord progressions for these songs and wrote a melody original on top of it to build those shifts. Another side note here, in addition to Joe's original music, there's a bit of what the team took to calling dingography. What this element is will swiftly be clear in performance, but suffice to say that executing its specificity really called for a good chunk of rehearsal hours. I'd like to turn your attention now to our cast, as we've a very sweet and triumphant story for you. We're thrilled, first of all, to bring back a host of actors with whom we've worked multiple times. James Carrington, based out of Milwaukee, is returning to Forward to play Kenneth. You would have last seen him as Golden Thunder in Airness. Sam White, who is a 40-year-plus veteran of Madison Theater, returns after the 2019-2020 season, where he appeared into Peter Pan on her 70th birthday. LaCrissa Grandberry, who straddles Chicago and Door County through her work at Northern Sky, returns after first appearing here in Exit Strategy. But finally, Terry Bell, you may read in your program, is making his debut in front of audiences here. But he's no stranger to Forward. He was in the original iteration cast of Amateurs, the production on which Forward was working when the pandemic sent the world into isolation in 2020. A play, in fact, about a troupe of medieval actors trying to outrun the plague. When Forward returned to live performances, Amateurs was our first production back. At that point, Terry was unavailable to re-rehearse his role alongside the rest of that team, unfortunately. He couldn't join us. But fortunately, James Carrington was and stepped in for that production. Now, here in Primary Trust, they're working together. We're so happy to give Terry another warm Madison welcome, and so happy that an audience will finally get to see him in person. With that, it's about time to leave you to your Mai Tais. But before I go, one item of note. Kenneth, the protagonist here, has some things going on in his life and past that he's working through. Inspired by the courage to take a step towards a better life and a healthier self, Ford reached out to several organizations in town to ask how they help other humans and how we, in turn, can help them. Check out their answers in the lobby, just down the hall from the rotunda as you go into the playhouse. Welcome once again to our season, and join me another time to hear about stories that are changing the narrative. Enjoy.